Hey guys, and welcome to the 6th installment of Updated Builds, a series where I go over old Warframes that I already made a couple of build videos for and I bring them up to date because a lot of the build videos that I did are very old and horrifically outdated. Now today we're going to check out one of the most versatile Warframes in the entire game, and the Warframe that I started with around 4 years ago, the Excalibur. Excalibur is the OG frame. He is the face of the game and he's gone through so many changes over the years. I'm kind of surprised that I only have 5 form on him. He even went through a full rework about 2 years ago, which has made him even better than before. And today I want to share with you the 3 builds that I use on Excalibur, and I switch between them based on what I'm doing. The first build focuses on Radial Blind, which is a really cool setup that provides a lot of crowd control and can also be used as sort of a ghetto focus farming setup. The second build is focused around Radial Javelin and does a very nice damage over a pretty sizable area. And finally we have the Exalted Blade build, because what kind of an Excalibur video would this be without an Exalted Blade setup? And let's start it off with the Radial Blind setup. So the aura I'm using here is Steel Charge, and this is great because of 2 things. Number one, it's the aura that gives you the highest capacity, so you have more capacity to play around with, which is always nice, but it also increases your melee damage, and this is great for when you want to do some focus farming, because there's a high chance you will one-shot the enemies when you hit them. Now for the Exile slot you can use whatever you want, but I'm personally using Rush here so that I get more sprint speed for focus farming. I'm then getting even more sprint speed from Armored Agility, which also adds a little bit of armor, which is always nice, and I'm using Vitality for a little bit of extra health, though you don't really need this because most of the enemies will be blinded. I'm then using Fleeting Expertise, that's 2 ranks from the top to save on some duration, and Streamline for 170% efficiency. This makes Radial Blind super cheap and spammable. I'm then using Stretch and Overextended, which basically guarantees that I'm gonna blind everything, even in big rooms, and we top it off with Primed Continuity and Augur Message, which is gonna balance out Fleeting Expertise but give us some extra duration so the enemies are blinded for a decent amount of time. Now, even though this can be used as sort of a ghetto focus farming setup and it works pretty well, it's not as good as something like Equinox, because in order to blind enemies you have to have line of sight of them, which means they have line of sight of you so they could see you and break your stealth multiplier. There's also a short cooldown on Radial Blind, which means you can't spam it, so every now and then you won't be able to blind enemies that are standing right in front of you. Now the thing I really like about this setup is that even though it can be used as sort of a ghetto focus farming setup, it is still pretty good even outside of that. You can just run missions with this and provide stupid amounts of crowd control over a very large area. You don't even have to use a massive melee weapon like I'm using with my Guandao that has a range ribbon. You can carry around a Covert Lethality dagger and just do finishers on the enemies, because Radial Blind does open them up to finishers, which provides a very easy way to one-shot everything as long as you can blind it. And finally, the reason why I'm not using the Augment for Radial Blind, which increases finisher damage, is because, well, number one, you can just run a Covert Lethality dagger and one-shot everything, and number two, it is affected by power strength, and you can't really get good duration, good range, and good efficiency while also getting good strength. So while I can definitely go and crowbar the Augment in, somehow it will cripple the build in other ways. Moving on to build number 2, which is the Radial Javelin setup. This one is also using Steel Charge, though it doesn't really benefit it in any way. It's just there so it fits the polarity and adds a ton of capacity for me to play around with. So if you have the base Excalibur that doesn't have any polarity in the aura, you can slap on Energy Siphon or Corrosive Projection there. I'm then using Primed Vigor because I have Primed Vigor and it provides a little bit of health and shields, but you can use whatever you want. You don't even have to use a defensive mod here because you're going to be killing enemies from pretty far away. I'm then using Augur Reach and Stretch for a good amount of range without sacrificing any strength like you would with Overextended. This is really nice because you can hit enemies that are really far away. And then I slapped on Primed Flow. You can use the regular one if you don't have the primed version, just to have a bigger energy pool so I can bank more energy. I'm then using a fully ranked Fleeting Expertise and Streamline for maximum power efficiency, which caps at 175, so it's actually overcapped a little bit, and this is because we don't need duration and we want to make Radial Javelin as cheap as possible so we can spam it, and we top it off with some power strength, so we have Intensify, Transient Fortitude and Power Drift so we can actually do some damage. Now, as I said already, this is the more efficient version of the Radial Javelin setup, because I generally don't like to build my frames to rely on other frames, so something like Trinity or Harrow. And while it doesn't do as much damage as a setup that would run Blind Rage and just go full on power strength, it is self-sustainable. You don't even need Zenuric, you can just survive on picking up energy orbs here and there. But if you have Zenuric, you can just pop the energy regen and just stand in one spot and spam Javelin. This is not a sortie kind of setup, yeah, it just doesn't do enough damage, but it's fantastic for just farming stuff on the star chart. Yeah, you can pick something like Io and Jupiter, stand on one of the elevated spots and just spam Javelin throughout and farm relics or something. The thing I like about this setup the most though, and why I prefer it over the more damaging and less efficient version, is that it's not limited to those kinds of missions. You can just take it into an exterminate mission and use it whenever you run into a big room full of enemies. And if the situation demands it, you can even pull out your Exalted Blade and start swinging that around instead. The only thing that you can't really do with this setup is blind enemies with Radial Blind, because you have so little duration, they're gonna be out of it almost instantly. But other than that, it's a very fun and versatile setup that you can just faff around with on the star chart. You can even turn this into a full-on melee setup by taking out Flow and putting in Furious Javelin, which will increase your melee damage whenever you use Radial Javelin. Though bear in mind that will require some tweaking on your end, because you need some duration, otherwise the melee buff is going to be very short. The best way to do that, in my opinion, would be to take out Fleeting Expertise and replace it with either Continuity or the primed version of Continuity. And finally we have build number 3, which is focused around Exalted Blade, and I'm going to show you both the normal version and the Chromatic Blade one. The reason I separated them is because you want to use a different setup on your melee weapon for each one. So we started off once again with the Steel Charge Aura. This is really good here because it adds a ton of mod capacity, but it also increases the damage of Exalted Blade. I'm then using Vitality and Steel Fiber for some extra tankiness, which is kind of necessary because this build is designed to go up against higher levels. Then I'm once again using Fleeting Expertise, that's 2 ranks from the top, to save some duration, because duration affects the energy drain on Exalted Blade, and with this setup it drains less than 1 energy every second. But it's also nice to have some extra duration for either casting Radial Blind or doing a slide attack with Exalted Blade, which also pops a Radial Blind, so this gives it some duration. And we combine that once again with Streamline for 170% efficiency. I'm then using Primed Flow once again just to have a bigger bank of energy, followed by Prime Continuity, which balances out Fleeting Expertise and Transient Fortitude, which is combined with Intensify and Power Drift for some power strength. But Exalted Blade is also affected by a bunch of stuff on your melee weapon, so we have generic damage, so we add Prime Pressure Point, then there is attack speed, so Primed Fury and Berserker, which also works. It's also affected by crit, so we go with True Steel and Organ Shatter, and finally some elemental mods which will add raw damage. It's also affected by the melee combo multiplier, but that's really hard to stack with Exalted Blade nowadays because they've changed it to where you only register a hit for the combo if you hit the enemy with the actual Exalted Blade, not the waves. So things like body count, blood rush and that kind of stuff doesn't really work that well anymore. But even without those mods, the damage is still pretty good, as you can see over here. Now when it comes to the Chromatic Blade augment, the best thing you can do in my opinion with this setup is simply take out Primed Flow and put it there. And this is because, as I've mentioned already, this build is super efficient and drains less than 1 energy every second, so you don't really need the bigger energy pool. It's sort of just a quality of life thing. Now the thing that's gonna change the most with the addition of this augment is the setup on your melee weapon. Now you of course don't have to run the exact same setup on your melee weapon that I'm using here, it's just the one that I found worked the best for me. So we're once again gonna use Primed Pressure Point for generic damage, then Primed Fury for attack speed, but we're gonna go with Condition Overload to get more melee damage as we proc status on the enemy. We're still gonna go with True Steel, Organ Shatter and Berserker because of the extra crit damage and attack speed, but this time around we're gonna top it off with 2 dual stat mods to get extra status chance. And this setup is, well, I'm just gonna let you watch the clip. Yeah, it's pretty good. This is kind of like the ultimate Excalibur setup. The Radial Blind one is nice, the Radial Javelin one is pretty good as well, but this one, this is the bee's knees right here. It does a ton of damage and it's very flexible. You can change the energy color on your Excalibur, which will change the type of damage it does with Chromatic Blade, and just in case there is like an enemy elemental enhancement sortie where the enemies don't take any elemental damage whatsoever pretty much, you can just take the augment off and put in Flow to do physical damage instead. And I absolutely adore the efficiency of this setup because, as I've said already, it's super efficient. It drains less than 1 energy per second with Exalted Blade out, so you can pretty much just turn it on at the start of the mission and swing it around till the very end. On top of that though, it also makes the other abilities very cheap, so you can slash dash around, you can blind enemies with Radial Blind, and you can even pop Radial Javelin every now and then if you run into a room that's filled with enemies. This build is just awesome. It will take you through the entire star chart and you can do all sorties with it as well. It's also very functional in all mission types, which is awesome because what you get with a lot of builds is you have this 1 or 2 mission types that are just not that great, but with this one you can do Capture, Exterminate, Sabotage, Spy, Survival, Defense, Interception, Defection, anything really. which is really cool as well. And it's, I think, why we get people like one of my clanmates, I don't remember his name, which is kind of bad, but he just plays Exalted Blade Excalibur, nothing else. He just loves the playstyle and he can just do whatever he wants with it, which is awesome. So yeah, Excalibur, a fantastic frame that can be built for 1,000 different things. I mean, I've had this dude for like 4 years and I still have a blast whenever I play him, so I think that says a lot. And if you don't have Excalibur already, you should definitely go and get him. And if you do have Excalibur, but you're not quite sure how to build him, I would recommend you check out some of these builds. You of course don't have to copy them exactly, you can tweak things here and there and customize them so they fit you and how you like to play, and not look at my builds as if they were set in stone. You can tweak things here and there, look at them as more of a template, an idea for a build that you can customize for yourself. Now of course all of these builds will work on the regular Excalibur as well as Excalibur Prime if you're one of the lucky few that actually have him, and they should work on Excalibur Umbra once we get him as well, because at the end of the day it's just an Excalibur with a scarf. And if you're not quite sure how you should go about adding format to these setups, simply put on all the mods, and if they don't fit, look for the mod that has the highest capacity drain, format for that, and do that until all the mods fit. And that's pretty much it for the builds, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and it was helpful, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.